10 years ago, a modest parcel of land passed into my hands through a will, a bequest from a distant relative I barely knew. It was 50 acres of rolling hills, dotted with old oaks and a small creek, tucked away in a corner of a rapidly developing county. Back then, it was valued at a mere $200,000. A forgotten plot surrounded by sprawling suburbs and new commercial zones. I was a city dweller, working a desk job, with no experience in land management or rural life. The inheritance felt like both, a gift and a burden, a sudden responsibility I wasn't prepared for. The land was raw, undeveloped, and zoned for agricultural use, with no immediate prospects for profit. Still, it carried a sense of legacy, a connection to a family history I'd never fully explored. The first few years were quiet. I visited the property occasionally, walking the uneven terrain, imagining what could be done with it. The idea of selling crossed my mind, but something held me back, a mix of sentimentality and curiosity about its potential. Local developers began eyeing the area, and whispers of rezoning for residential or commercial use started circulating. By year 3, the land's value had climbed to $1 million as the county's growth exploded. Subdivisions sprouted nearby and big box stores moved in. My property, once a quiet backwater, was now prime real estate. By year 7, appraisals pegged it at $5 million, and by year 10, it hit $10 million. The land had become a gold mine. But with that value came unexpected trouble. The local homeowners association, HOA, from a nearby upscale community built just a mile away, took an immediate interest in my property. Their neighborhood, with its manicured lawns and gated entrances, was home to wealthy residents who viewed my undeveloped land as an eyesore. They wanted it cleaned up, developed, or sold to someone who would conform to their vision of the area. At first, their complaints were subtle. Letters citing vague community standards or requests to clear brush. I ignored them, as the land wasn't part of their jurisdiction. It was zoned agricultural, not residential, and I owed them nothing. But the HOA wasn't accustomed to being ignored. The harassment began in earnest by year 5. It started with petty citations for untidy land, despite no legal basis for their claims. I hired a lawyer to review the county regulations, who confirmed the HOA had no authority over my property. Still, the letters kept coming, each more aggressive than the last. They demanded I install fencing, mow the wild grass, or remove fallen branches. When I didn't comply, they escalated. County inspectors, prompted by HOA complaints, showed up unannounced, poking around for violations that didn't exist. Each visit cost me time and legal fees to defend my rights. The lawyer's advice was clear. Stand firm, document everything, and don't give in. By year 7, the HOA's tactics grew bolder. Sheriff's deputies started appearing at my property, claiming they'd received complaints about suspicious activity. The first time I was stunned. A deputy knocked on my door in the city asking if I was squatting on my own land. I showed him the deed and tax records and he left, visibly embarrassed. But the visits didn't stop. Over the next 2 years, deputies showed up 5 more times, each citing anonymous tips about trespassing or illegal dumping. I installed trail cameras to catch any real trespassers, but the footage only showed wildlife and the occasional curious hiker. The complaints were baseless, but the HOA's influence was clear. They had connections in the county, and they knew how to wield them. The stress was relentless. Every visit from law enforcement chipped away at my peace of mind. I started questioning whether keeping the land was worth it. The HOA's goal was obvious: make my life so miserable I'd sell to one of their developer allies who'd turn the land into another cookie-cutter subdivision. I researched the HOA's board and found they were a tight-knit group of local elites, real estate moguls, retired politicians, and business owners with stakes in the area's growth. My land, untouched and wild, didn't fit their vision of progress. It was a thorn in their side, a reminder of what the area used to be before their gated enclaves took over. I began attending county meetings to understand the politics at play. The HOA had sway over local officials, pushing for rezoning that would force me to develop or sell. They argued my land was a blight on the community, ignoring its ecological value. The creek supported local wildlife, and the oaks were home to protected bird species. I hired an environmental consultant to assess the land, who confirmed its importance as a habitat. Armed with this data, I fought back at public hearings, presenting evidence that my property was an asset, not a liability. The county board, under pressure from both sides, delayed any rezoning decisions, but the HOA didn't relent. The financial strain was real. Legal fees, property taxes, and maintenance costs piled up. I wasn't wealthy, just a regular person who'd stumbled into a valuable asset. The land's $10 million valuation was theoretical. I couldn't access that wealth without selling, and selling felt like giving in to the HOA's bullying. Friends urged me to cash out, but I'd grown attached to the land. It wasn't just about the money, it was about principle. This was my inheritance, my piece of the world, and I wasn't going to let a group of entitled neighbors dictate its fate. By year 9, I was exhausted but resolute. I started working with a local conservation group to explore options for protecting the land. They suggested a conservation easement, which would preserve the property's natural state while offering tax benefits. It wasn't a perfect solution. It would lock the land's value away from development, but it felt like a way to honor its legacy while shielding it from the HOA's grasp. The process was slow, requiring surveys, legal reviews, and negotiations, but it gave me a glimmer of hope. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore, I was fighting for the land itself. The HOA's harassment peaked that year. One morning I arrived at the property to find a sheriff's deputy waiting, claiming a report of illegal construction. There was nothing but trees and grass, but the deputy insisted on a full inspection. I recorded the interaction, noting his badge number and the lack of evidence. My lawyer later traced the complaint to an HOA board member's phone call. It was a pattern: false reports, vague accusations, and constant pressure. I filed a formal complaint with the sheriff's department, alleging harassment, and demanded an investigation into the HOA's misuse of county resources. The department stonewalled, but the complaint put them on notice. As year 10 approached, the land's value hit $10 million, and the HOA's desperation grew. They sent a final letter offering to mediate if I sold to a developer they recommended. I tore it up. The conservation easement was nearly finalized, and I felt a quiet victory forming. The land would stay wild, a small rebellion against the sprawl creeping around it. The HOA's tactics had backfired. They'd pushed me to protect the land in a way I might not have considered otherwise. But the fight wasn't over. I knew they'd keep coming, and I had to stay vigilant. The battle with the HOA hardened my resolve, but it also revealed the lengths they'd go to control the area. By year 10, I'd learned their playbook: use bureaucratic pressure, leverage local connections, and wear down their target until surrender felt inevitable. But I wasn't the only one watching. Neighbors outside the HOA's gated bubble started noticing the pattern. Small farmers and landowners nearby shared similar stories: inspections, citations, and veiled threats from the same group. My fight became a rallying point, a quiet resistance against the HOA's overreach. I wasn't a hero, just someone pushed too far, but I realized I had allies. The conservation easement moved forward, a complex process that required coordination with the county, the state, and the conservation group. The easement would restrict development on the land forever, preserving its natural state. In return, I'd receive tax breaks that eased the financial burden of holding on to it. The land's $10 million valuation meant nothing if I couldn't afford the taxes, which had skyrocketed with the area's growth. The easement wasn't just a shield against the HOA, it was a lifeline to keep the land in my hands. The conservation group helped navigate the paperwork, and by mid-year 10 we were close to final approval. The HOA, sensing their window closing, doubled down. Deputies showed up again, this time with a county inspector claiming my creek was a flood hazard. It was absurd, the creek had never flooded, and a hydrologist's report proved it posed no risk. I presented the report at a county hearing, where the inspector admitted the complaint came from an anonymous source. The room murmured. The HOA's fingerprints were obvious. I used the opportunity to call out their tactics publicly, naming board members with ties to developers. The county board, wary of bad press, promised to investigate. It was a small win, but it showed the HOA wasn't untouchable. I started connecting with other landowners, forming a loose coalition to share resources and information. We tracked HOA complaints, cross-referenced them with county records, and found a pattern of selective enforcement. Properties that didn't fit the HOA's aesthetic, rural lots, small farms, or undeveloped land like mine, faced constant scrutiny while their allies' projects sailed through. We presented our findings to a local journalist who ran a story exposing the HOA's influence. The article didn't name me directly at my request, but it sparked a wider conversation. Residents began questioning the HOA's power, and the county board faced pressure to act. The legal costs were still a drain. I'd spent over $50,000 on lawyers, consultants, and taxes, money I didn't have to spare. I took on extra freelance work to cover the bills, cutting into time I'd rather spend on the land. The stress affected my health, sleepless nights, constant worry about the next deputy at my door. But the coalition gave me strength. We pooled resources to hire a shared attorney, who filed a class action lawsuit against the HOA for harassment and abuse of process. The lawsuit wasn't a sure thing, but it sent a message. We weren't backing down. The conservation easement was finalized in late year 10. The land was now protected, its wild beauty locked away from bulldozers and subdivisions. The tax relief kicked in, easing the financial strain. I visited the property the day the easement was signed, walking the creek's edge as hawks circled overhead. It felt like a victory, but not a complete one. The HOA was still active and the lawsuit was just beginning. I knew they'd find new ways to push, but I was ready. The trail cameras stayed up, the lawyer stayed on retainer, and the coalition grew stronger. The land's value remained at $10 million on paper, but its real worth was deeper. It was a piece of history, a refuge for wildlife and a stand against greed. I started working with the conservation group to open parts of the land for educational programs, guided walks for schools, studies for ecologists. It wasn't about profit. It was about purpose. The HOA hated it. Their vision of a manicured, profitable county didn't include muddy kids learning about wetlands or researchers counting bird nests. Every step I took to preserve the land was a jab at their control. The sheriff's visit slowed after the lawsuit gained traction. The department, under scrutiny, started requiring verifiable evidence for complaints. The HOA's anonymous tips no longer held weight. I kept detailed records of every interaction, building a case for the lawsuit. The coalition uncovered more. Dirt, emails showing HOA board members colluding with developers to pressure landowners. The journalist published a follow-up, and the county board finally revoked a proposed rezoning plan that would have benefited the HOA's allies. It was a turning point, proof that persistence could chip away at their influence. I began planning for the land's future. The conservation group suggested a trust to manage it after I was gone, ensuring its protection for generations. I liked the idea. It felt like passing on the legacy I'd inherited, but on my terms. I also explored small-scale agriculture, like native plant nurseries, to generate income without violating the easement. The land could support itself and the community, not just the HOA's vision of progress. I hired a consultant to map out options, balancing conservation with sustainability. The fight with the HOA taught me resilience. I'd started as an outsider, unprepared for the politics of land ownership. Now, I was a player in the game, backed by allies and armed with knowledge. The HOA still loomed, but they were losing ground. The lawsuit moved slowly, but discovery revealed more of their tactics, bribes, favors, and threats. The coalition grew, pulling in more landowners and even some HOA residents fed up with their board's overreach. We weren't just fighting for my land. We were fighting for the county's soul. As year 11 loomed, I felt a cautious optimism. The land was safe for now. The HOA's grip was loosening, and the community was waking up. I walked the property one evening, the sun setting over the oaks, and felt a quiet pride. This wasn't just about $10 million or 50 acres. It was about standing up to bullies, honoring a legacy, and protecting something bigger than myself. The fight wasn't over, but I'd found my purpose in it.